My name is Ian Katz, and you are listening to my autoethnography podcast. So let's get started here. Today I'm going to be talking about the Jewish American experience. As a member of the Jewish American population, I thought this would be really fitting for my autoethnography. I think that it's a very strong community, but also a very interesting one, especially right now during the 21st century and 2020 especially. So a little introduction to the community as a whole. There are around 6.7 million Jews in America. So that makes up about 2% of the population as a whole. So just defining what it means to be Jewish here. So that includes people who are culturally Jewish. So not just those that are religiously Jewish, but those that grew up in a household with one or both parents being Jewish. And then so I'm going to refer to spaces as Jewish spaces and non-Jewish spaces. Another definition here: a non-Jewish space is a community where the majority of individuals are not Jewish. And remembering what the definition for what I've defined as Jewish is there. And this is the alternate of this being the Jewish space would just be the opposite. So a space or a community where the majority of individuals are Jewish. Moving on to my driving questions for this project. I asked two questions mainly, and that was, what is the emotional experience for an American Jew in typically non-Jewish spaces? Kind of focusing on the difference between the Jewish spaces and the non-Jewish spaces, with maybe a little focus on anti-Semitism and microaggressions. And then the second question I asked was, how does an American Jew support the Black Lives Matter movement while also supporting the existence of Israel? Is that possible? And then, with this, I'll get into the secondary research I did towards this. But there is obviously a strong connection between the American Jews and Black Americans, just historically, and there is a history of anti-Zionism within the Black Lives Matter movement, and just kind of, is there a disconnect there? And then, so now kind of getting into my narratives, which are pretty much my biases and my experience. So as far as the first question goes, right, the experience, emotional experience of the American Jew, I found in my experience, and the narrative that I wanted to tell, is that the Jewish spaces feel a little more safe, and there are a number of microaggressions and anti-Semitic acts that non-Jewish members of the American community as a whole tend to make. And even when it's not in a malicious way, just the shared experience of Jewish people makes the Jewish community feel a little bit more safe than the non-Jewish community. And then getting into the second question, which is, how does an American Jew support the Black Lives Matter movement? I found in my experience, and the narrative that I wanted to tell, is that the American Jew can be fully supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement and also be supportive of the existence of Israel. It is completely possible, and it is possible to be critical of Israel while also supporting its existence. There is a line between anti-Semitic sentiment and being still and anti Israel, in terms of their politics, and that's sentiment as well. So there is a line, and you can be on the keeping Israel accountable line without being anti-Semitic. So kind of getting into my methodology here for primary research, and you'll hear a little bit of these interviews today. I did an interview with my little brother Zach, and I think Zach provides a very cool perspective as a Jewish American who goes to a non-Jewish university at Syracuse University, and he's in a non-Jewish frat. So the majority of his fraternity brothers are not Jewish, And so I thought that was a very interesting perspective, especially as he came from a fully Jewish high school. So he can kind of offer some contrast into those two experiences. And then I also interviewed my mother, Marsa. She offers the perspective as a Jewish American who has strong involvement in the temple community, but she also has a strong involvement in the yoga community, mostly. Um, and also she's in a different generation, so I thought that might be an interesting perspective as well. As far as secondary research, I did a lot of searching about, okay, what is the statistics on the Jewish population as a whole? How do they feel about anti-Semitism in our country? And then I also looked into kind of some articles that are about sort of the Black Lives Matter movement and the overlap between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Jewish American community, and pulled a quote from the Black Lives or Fight for Black Lives um, platform, which I'll get into in a little bit, but something to look forward to there. Um, so as far as Jews in America, so this is the secondary research here. Um, like I said, there's 6.7 million Jews in America, so it makes up 2%. So it's a substantial amount, definitely a minority. And when the American Jewish community of Jewish Americans did a survey, they found that 88% of those Jews said that anti-Semitism is a problem in America today. And when asked if anti-Semitism in America had increased in the last 5 years, 82% of the Jews surveyed said yes, that it had. Something that was in the media, this as far as anti-Semitism goes and hate crimes towards Jews. In October of 2018, there were 11 Jews shot and killed in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And I think what's really interesting about this hate crime is that this individual, while obviously sick, was not alone and was in chat rooms discussing anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories, on these chat rooms on social media. And so these things are out there, these beliefs are out there, and while we don't always see them manifest themselves in shootings and killings, the sentiment is still very strongly out there, and even if it's just an underlying thing, it is a part of our culture. So as far as the Black Lives Matter question goes, and secondary research for that, I did a good amount of reading on kind of the history of the Jewish American involvement in the fight for equality. And it dates all the way back to the 19th century, so the 1800s. Generally speaking, in the South, there was a bit more hesitation to do so openly because there was a desire amongst the Jewish Americans in the South to kind of save their own. And with all the bigotry and hate in the South, especially, Jews were receiving a lot, and I mean in no way to justify this behavior, but the Jews were scared. They were scared of being killed and discriminated against themselves, and so any sort of alignment with African Americans could only add to that and fuel the fire. And that's not to say that it didn't happen. There were a number of rabbis and congregations that came out openly and said, we're done with these laws. We fully support full segregation, things of that nature. And then I thought something I found that was really interesting was with Brown v. Board of Education, right? So the decision that integrated schools, there was this individual, Kenneth Clark, who presented a study that showed that separate was inherently not equal. It really helped the argument that led to the integration of schools. And what's interesting is that study was done by the American Jewish Committee. So I think that's really interesting and just kind of highlighting the fact that Jews were fighting for equal rights. from the onset. And then kind of getting into this, but before I get into this little disconnect, I think it is important to note that Jews continue to fight for this equality, and there is a strong connection between these two groups of people historically, and that continues. We see that in the Black Lives Matter protests as Jews are organizing and getting out and being in support of these movements, and the movement for police reform and for equality in our systems, because there truly is a systematic inequality. But moving forward here into a little bit of the disconnect, in 2016, the Movement for Black Lives platform, so basically, the Black Lives Matter movement has been generally a bit fragmented, in that there hasn't really been a centralized entity. And so in 2016, the Movement for Black Lives, they called it, came together. It was, I think, about 50 groups of different Black Lives Matter organizations throughout the country came together and came up with a unified platform. It was about 40,000 words, and part of it, a very small part of it, described Israel as an apartheid state. And this is quoting, an apartheid state that is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. And so that is difficult for an American Jew to read, or any Jew to that end, because the Jews are historically, the largest genocide, I'm unsure if it's the largest genocide ever, but when Jews think about genocide, and when most Americans would be asked about genocide, I would assume they would one of the first ones they would list would be the Holocaust, and that in itself is the reason that Israel exists, is because there needs to be a safe place for Jews, and without that, it's very difficult for the Jewish population as a whole to feel safe in the world, really. And that might sound dramatic, but The Atlantic actually came out with an article that asked the question, is it time for Jews to leave Europe? And this was, some 7 years ago that this came out. And basically, the conclusion they came to is that, yes, it is time for Jews to leave Europe. Anti-Semitism has been steadily rising all throughout Europe. And obviously, we're looking at the American Jew right now. But I think it's important when highlighting why there needs to be an Israel, that anti-Semitism is rampant throughout the world. And Jews face this sort of persecution everywhere. And that's not to say that Israel is a perfect place. Obviously, there is a oppression of Palestinian people that is unjustified. And we can be critical of the politics and of the state of Israel and fight for a two-state solution, while also saying that making note of the fact that there needs to be an Israel and it needs to exist. And to say that Israel is an apartheid state committing genocide against the Palestinian people, a lot of Jews in America felt that was anti-Zionist, and if not itself anti-Zionist, could fuel anti-Zionism. And when I say anti-Zionism, I mean a belief that there should not be a state of Israel altogether. And I'll in my interview with Zach, actually, my little brother, he talked a lot about this, and I'll highlight that as well. And then the other piece that I thought was interesting and important to highlight with this kind of disconnect is this individual, Louis Farrakhan, who's the leader of the Nation of Islam. And while he has said a lot of great things in terms of, okay, we need to, as a black community, come together and support one another, and he empowers black individuals and black Americans to feel strong and to, fight for equality. And that is all great. However, he has a long history of making anti-Semitic remarks. In 2018, in February of 2018, he said and I quote, "The Jews were responsible for all the filth and degenerate behavior that Hollywood is putting out, turning men into women and women into men." So not only is this anti-Semitic, I thought this was an important one to highlight, because not only is it anti-Semitic, it's anti-trans, and obviously, it's important to support all LGBTQ members, LGBTQ plus members of the American community, and so a lot of prominent media-facing members of the Black Lives Matter movement have supported him. From Steven Jackson to Deshaun Jackson, who are both athletes, to Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube. A lot of artists support this man and will quote this man and push out on their Instagrams anti-Semitic tropes. And so I'm going to play a little bit of my interview with Zach right now, just so you can hear a little bit. And I'm especially focusing on a couple things, like the Jewish experience in non-Jewish spaces. So I thought you would be good to talk to, because you have experience in Jewish spaces, like in your friendships with people at GAN, and then in the non-Jewish spaces, like at school. Yeah, at school. And then also something I'm curious about, which is kind of a little more poignant, is the intersection of American Judaism and Black Lives Matter, and how those overlap. So yeah, I guess if you want to just if you could just share at first to a little bit about how you think how were your friendships in high school maybe different from your friendships today, if at all?
Don't want to answer it right now?
Yeah.
I mean, when I was in high school, going to a Shabbat dinner on Friday night was a normal thing.
Mm-hmm.
Having that Jewish experience with your friends was a very normal thing, and that's just it's not even a part of it at school, obviously, because most of my friends aren't Jewish, but some of my friends at school are Jewish, and having that Jewish experience with them, going to temple for the holidays or fasting with them, it's a nice experience to be able to. It's kind of like a taste of high school almost with my friends at school, when I am able to experience the Jewish part of a friendship again.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice. But I'd say it's very different in the sense that it was normal to talk about Jewish stuff, and
Yeah.
and at school it's not it's exclusive to me,
Mm-hmm.
It's usually it wasn't usually exclusive to me.
Yeah. It's almost a differentiator a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that there's a solid understanding by your non-Jewish peers of what your Judaism is?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm very I'll talk about it stuff. I love talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I talk. Yeah.
Cool.
Talk about a lot. They'll ask questions when I go to. When we'll go to the holidays, and I'll explain it to them and everything.
Nice. So now just kind of getting onto the next little question, which is Black Lives Matter and the intersection there. Is it fair to assume that you're a supporter of Black Lives Matter?
That's fair to assume.
Okay. And then I remember talking with you about a little bit about what was going on with Steven Jackson, and do you remember that, Deshaun Jackson? Do you feel there's any sort of conflict in your Judaism
and like
Well, I mean,
prominent media members of Black Lives Matter.
There's kind of this like belief that oppressed groups of people, like if you consider yourself part of a group that was at one point oppressed, you're supposed to, at least like the Jewish way of looking at it is like you're supposed to help others that are experiencing the same sort of oppression that you faced.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been like a theme for years that Jewish activists have been big supporters of Black Lives Matters, and of dating back to the 1960s during the social during the social rights movement and the civil rights movement. Jewish activists played a big part during that. I did a lot of research on that when I was in high school, but I think that it's our responsibility to support and be voices for minorities that don't have the voices that we have sometimes, and I think that it's our responsibility to support them as a group that was once oppressed.
Mm-hmm. And like, I totally agree. And then, so that said, is there any sort of like cognitive dissonance of being like, I'm all in on Black Lives Matter, and then hearing things like what Stephen Jackson said and like,
I mean, I think those are very individuals, like cases.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's very representative of Black Lives Matter as a whole, of their ideals.
So the movement for Black Lives in 2016, which is like a compilation of like 50 different organizations like trying to kind of centralize a movement, in their platform that they came out, it was like a 40,000 word platform, and part of it listed Israel as a like a apartheid state committing genocide on Palestinians. And some people have an issue with that. Like, for me, it's like, I'd love to hear you talk about like, okay, so considering that, how do we be critical of Israel? How do we balance being critical of Israel, supporting Black lives, and supporting the existence of Israel?
Yeah.
So that, and then also, do you know Louis Farrakhan?
Of course.
So like, how do we square that a lot of people support this guy?
So I'm in support of a two-state solution. I think that Palestinians should have their own right to citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they have the governing powers to run a proper government. But that being said, I do think that they have a right to a citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of being anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. Anti-Zionist, if you are anti-Zionist, you are anti-Semitic. So, because being a Zionist means you believe in the existence of Israel. You believe that there should be a Jewish state. So, if you don't believe that, there is a deep sense of anti-Semitism in that. If there should be a separation between Israel as a genocide state and Israel as a controlling state, because there's no government in Palestine that is capable of having of controlling a population of people. You see Hamas, which is a super radical organization, and then there's the other organization, the Palestinian
Liberalization.
What?
Or the Palestinian, the PLO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit better, but it's not great. And I just think that Israel is in no way a genocide state. If you think that Israel is a genocide state, it's looking at it completely at one perspective. You're only hearing one side of the story, because it completely goes both ways. I think that it's hard to hear when leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement are talking about Israel's genocide state and being anti-Zionist because it is anti-Semitic. But I think that, like, it can't take away from doing what's right. And what is right is equality for everyone. I understand that they have beliefs that are incorrect about Israel, which is unfortunate. But I still think that as Americans living in America, we're still Jewish. We should still support Israel. But as Americans, I think it is our deep responsibility to support equality and someone shouldn't have to walk around the streets worried about getting beat up by a cop.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's just an American responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, you gave me a lot there.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks, dude.
Okay, cool. So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Zach. I thought it was really interesting. That he made those comments about kind of the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and his feelings on the thoughts of that platform. But then underlying was his feeling of a responsibility as a Jew to fight for equal rights for all people. And now, I'm gonna play a little bit of my interview with my mom, Marsa. I hope you enjoy it. So my project is on the Jewish experience, especially as it pertains to like non-Jewish spaces. And so like I know you obviously have like an experience with the temple and like you're very involved with the temple, or like I don't know how involved you are right now.
I used to be.
Okay, so like what could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, since quarantine, they were doing some programming by Zoom, but none of it really appealed to me.
Mm-hmm.
They did like sisterhood things, or they have services in the morning on Shabbat morning, but my joy of going to services was being there in person and doing it with my dad, neither of which I can do right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of got away from it, and I miss it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I guess looking at like before quarantine then, like what did that offer you? Kind of like being...
It was meditative.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Does it like, as far as like socially, does it feel any sort of way like being able to be amongst other Jews?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's the only place that I really go I know that it's all Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's something that's unspoken that we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
We share a certain belief system, a certain history,
Yeah.
a certain ancestry that binds us together. It doesn't mean that I only want to exclusively be with people that I share that with, but when I'm in my synagogue, I know that that's there.
Yeah. No, I mean I feel like it's like for me it's like like alcoholism, and it's like I go to my meetings and it's like I feel like it's a similar thing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. All right, cool. And then like I was thinking about like what non-Jewish community you're involved in the most, and it's probably the yoga community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like what is that experience like in terms of like just like being a Jew in that space? Like what is that
what is that like? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of like positives, or like you maybe have not even thought about like being a Jew in that space before.
I actually haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I have not even thought about it. It doesn't come up. Now that it's coming into the holidays, like this 300-hour training that I'm
Mm-hmm.
facilitating, co-facilitating, as we head into the holidays and people, start to bring in their holiday traditions and their food and their need to have coverage for classes or whatnot, that will become more evident, and I will probably think more about my holiday traditions around that time. But the holidays in December in Judaism don't have the same significance, meaning, or depth as the holidays around in December for Christians. But for me, my holidays are in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, those are my big holidays.
Do you feel like, so like what I've heard is like, in terms of,
He's
yeah, I
intimidating.
know. Like Timmy would be up on this
He
bed.
would. He would. Can you go pick him up and put him over here?
Yeah.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, you're good. You're good. We love you, but we also love him. Doesn't mean we love you less.
Thank you.
Come on.
He loves putting his tushy on something really soft.
Hmm?
Are you taping this?
Mm-hmm.
He loves putting his tushy on something really soft.
Nice. Yeah, no, my teacher's on FaceTime
You
right
can you can quote me on that.
now. Yeah.
His Jewish tushy.
Yeah. Oh no. What are you doing?
Come on, get back over.
Yeah, he needs to like be on you.
I need to function.
He like was like, "What's over there? Am I missing anything over there?"
Yeah.
No. All right, so it sounds like there's like some differences in terms of like the holidays you celebrate. Do you feel like your Judaism impacts like your perspective in that space at all?
No.
No. Gotcha. Okay. What about totally changing the topic, right? I feel like I've got a pretty solid understanding of your view of Black Lives Matter and your like support of that. I'm interested to hear like are you familiar with like the platform that came out in 2016 and its mentioning of Israel and its stance on Israel? If not, that's okay.
In the Black community?
In the movement for Black Lives, like specifically.
No.
So the movement for Black Lives, just a little background, came out and said that like in their part of their platform, they referred to the they've referred to Israel as an apartheid state and said that they were committing genocide against the Palestinians.
In 2016.
In 2016, and then more recently, there's
All right, so that's the
the
interview
nation,
with
the Nation of
Imam,
Islam, the leader of that,
and I thought
name
it
is
was
Louis
really
Farrakhan.
cool.
and he promotes a lot of
to sit down with
anti-Semitic
her,
tropes.
and we don't really talk about these issues that much, and so
there is
to have this conversation with her,
there is definitely like
was really great, and
seemingly
to talk to her about
decent
just
amount
how
of
important it
anti-Semitism
is to
within
support Black Lives Matter.
the movement.
It's it is really difficult
And like,
for her.
I mean, it sounds like you haven't run into that
her
issue.
whole life
Is that fair to say?
learning about the Holocaust,
Gotcha.
and learning about why
And as
Israel
far
needs
as
to exist.
Black,
But
can I
that
just
doesn't
speak
take
to
away
Yeah,
from
yeah,
the fact
yeah.
that we need to fight for equality in our
believe
country
Black
for all
Lives
people.
Matter in,
So in
in
conclusion,
the regard of,
there are numbers and statistics that indicate rising
disparities in our
anti-Semitism in our
country.
country. However, it was
all over the
interesting
world,
that neither
but
my
especially
mom
in our country
or
and
my
what we've
brother,
seen a
offered that as
rise
part of their
bubble up
experiences as
over
American Jews.
out of the
And who am I to say
above
why?
the
But
surface.
could be
over the
because
last
they
4
haven't
years,
experienced
and
it. It could also be
I
because they
am-
don't want to talk about it.
I
And
firmly
in my
am
experience,
anti-racist.
you know, there's been a lot
in
of
that regard.
microaggressions.
I have not
There have been a lot of, you know, you could
really
even call them
examined
anti-Semitic
my
acts, whether
feelings
it's getting
around
a dollar
anti-Semitism
waved at
with
me or
Black Lives
pennies
Matter,
thrown
but
at me,
the stuff that's happened over
or, you know,
the recent
comments about
past, I am just,
noses and Holocaust jokes, whatever it may be.
horrified by.
That is
Gotcha.
something
Yeah.
I've experienced, so it was interesting to hear, you know, about that
Sweet.
from my
And,
brother and
and
my
I
mom.
think that the Black
Um,
people that I come
Then
in
as far as the
contact
Black Lives
with,
Matter is concerned,
who I
answering that
love,
question, Zach
um,
and Marcia are both hugely supportive
know
of the
that,
movement.
that I love
You know,
them,
neither
and
condones
they are
anti-Zionism,
not anti-Semitic
and
people.
both
Yeah.
are extremely
Yeah.
pro-Israel.
Yeah,
But as
I
far as
think
supporting Black Lives Matter as a whole, there
think,
is no question.
what I've
that,
seen is just like
Black Lives Matter
there's
is
been,
an
like-
important issue,
like-
and
like a
that,
little
that
bit
is
in the
not difficult
media
for them to
that is like a
to
little bit
support while also being an American Jew. So that's
and,
my
like-
autoethnography.
like,
I
has
hope you've
anti-Sem-
enjoyed. I hope you've learned a
anti-Semitism,
little bit about
and it's
my
something that
community
like I've had to
during these times. And
like
I hope
rationalize
you, I hope you
is
keep
like,
an open
okay,
mind
like,
and continue to
I'm
learn
all
more
in on
about
Black Lives
Jewish
Matter
American
and like
experience.
totally, and like I can say like this guy Louis Farrakhan like is like has great ideas in terms of like his support of black, you know, blacks, like black people supporting black people, and like
Right.
but like you know, politicians can have good ideas, but like their hate of other groups, you know, cancels that out, you know.
So, just a question for you. Would you
Yeah.
liken that to Islam as a beautiful, peaceful, loving religion, but there's also the militant side of that, the terrorist side of that?
Well, that's not Islam. And the Nation of Islam, like, yes, they're Muslims, but like that's not, the name isn't like it's a pro-black organization.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I think each one is kind of different. Like I was gonna say the example of like, yeah, Hitler had good ideas for the economy, but that's a bit extreme.
Yeah.
'Cause this guy's not Hitler, but like,
Right. Like I think that if you're a Nazi, you can't say you're a good Nazi
yeah, exactly.
because but you know.
But yeah, no, that's also different because that's a distortion of the religion of Islam.
Right.
And this guy is saying, like, he says a lot of things about, yeah, like we need to build each other up, like we need to empower each other, like you know, like we are strong, we are like all this stuff that's great.
Right.
And then he'll say stuff like the Jews in the media are,
Right.
and it's like
Yeah.
whoa.
Should have quit while you were ahead.
Yeah, and then a lot of famous people, like a lot of media facing members of the Black Lives Matter community are also followers of his, and will kind of echo what
I
he
see.
says.
Because they're following along with him.
Yeah, and they trust this guy, and
Right.
a lot of what he says they can relate to, and then he says this stuff, and they're like, oh yeah.
It's unfortunate. Yeah. Because they took a really good premise and they just took it too far.
And it's not even too far. It's like a totally different thing. Like,
Right.
but I mean, I don't know. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.